Hello, everyone. Max here, your trusty guide on another voyage into the heart of the AI universe. Welcome back to AI Pulse, the podcast where we dance with data, flirt with the future tech, and sometimes, just sometimes, get lost in the labyrinth of artificial intelligence. Whether you're a techie, a dreamer, or just plain curious, you've got a seat at our table. So pull up a chair and let's unravel the mysteries of AI together. Today, we're diving deep into the realm of data integrity in the AI ecosystem. Imagine, if you will, a world where our data, the very backbone of our digital lives, is as fluid and trustworthy as their currency in your wallet. In this episode, we'll peel back the layers of what actually keeps our digital world spinning, why every byte of data counts, and how we're ensuring its integrity. Because it's almost like guarding the Holy Grail. Joining us on this adventure is actually a very special guest, Frederik Rosseel, a member of the Night's Watch of Data Integrity who's taken up the black to protect our digital realm from the ever-encroaching shadows. We'll explore how the evolving landscape of AI challenges actually reshape our understanding of data integrity and why it matters more than ever, and what mystical tools and practices can ensure our digital treasures remain untarnished. So whether you're navigating the choppy waters of the digital sea on a raft made of code, or you're just intrigued by the thought of how invisible ones and zeros shape our world, this episode is for you. So buckle up, dear listeners, for an episode that promises to be as enlightening as it is entertaining. This is AI Pulse, and I'm Max, and we're ready to embark on this journey together. Let's dive in. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to really have you with us today. Just to start off, I know we've known each other for many, many years, too many to count at this point that I'm willing to admit. Could you just share a bit about your journey so far, professionally, also personally, if you want to share with the audience today? And then, of course, particularly, how you really became a leading voice in your field. And I'll let you explain exactly what your field is because it's quite interesting. Would you mind just doing that as a starter for this episode?
Okay, so back in 99, I ended up in the field of what was then called enterprise content management. But from the start, my main interest was sparked by document capture, so inbound processing at the time, because that triggers the processes in the backend. So if you want to automate things, that's where it all starts. And the other domain was digital archiving. So back in 2000, I was involved in one of the first implementations of a digital preservation solution. It was for the city of Antwerp back then. And later on in 2006, when we started Docbyte, from the start, the main focus was on digital preservation on the one hand, which was basically called digital archiving, and what were mailroom solutions back then. Okay, because inbound was all triggered by the mailroom solution. Processing happened there first, and then afterwards it was treated in what was very often in the end an archiving solution, but people refer to it as document management. But in the end, the goal was to archive that information. And from the start, it was our goal to start creating our own solutions. And that was using third-party software very often. It was also a goal to start building our own solutions. And then in 2015, we also started a new company. And the goal of that company was to create solutions using AI and machine learning. But the drawback back then is that not a lot of people had a lot of confidence in AI solutions. And in the end, the only viable solutions that we came up with was document classification and extraction. And as that was the business of Docbyte, we simply transferred that back to Docbyte. And now that field is called intelligent document processing. And the field of digital archiving is now the field of digital preservation or qualified electronic archiving. That's a bit, and it's also maybe a bit my fault that you ended up in that domain.
Yes, it is.
Because back then in 2015, you were working
Yeah,
for
yeah,
us.
no, it absolutely is your fault, but it's been a fun ride. And, it's funny that you said back in the day, there wasn't a lot of faith in AI and machine learning technologies, which is interesting because I look at it differently. We were doing AI before AI was cool.
Yep.
And there's a
Yep.
lot of that going around. No, but I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation to have today. And so in the introduction of this episode, I talked about, well, I compared the speed at which technology is developing to the space race, right? Everybody wanted to be first and was throwing everything they got to really achieve that ultimate goal. Now, similarly, much of AI's progress today is owed to substantial amounts of data that have been thrown at a problem, as well as computing power. And I think everybody's already heard about the data part of it, but that's actually something that we're going to dive into from a different aspect. But I just wanted to focus on the computing power section for a bit. So I was recently researching this and found some really interesting insights that even for me were new to learn about. So if you think, for example, the phenomenon of Moore's law, right? Everybody that's in technology knows about Moore's law, but just for everybody on the episode, that was formulated by one of Intel's co-founders, Gordon Moore, in 1965. And he really just predicted that the number of transistors on a chip would double approximately every 2 years, with the cost of those halving. Now, to make that relatable, imagine if you had a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle that would improve at the same rate. Today, that car would actually speed around at about 500,000 kilometers per hour and would only cost you 4 cents to buy, which is just to kind of make that comparison. It's actually quite interesting. And then taking into account how exponentially all of that has grown in terms of computing power that's available to us today. If we go back just 10 years, our computing power mainly operated at the gigaflops range, billions of calculations per second, which is still kind of understandable what that means. But if we fast forward to today, we're operating in the realm of petaflops, quadrillions of calculations per second. And that shift is not merely an improvement, it's actually an astronomical leap. Now, that kind of number, even to me, I don't know about you, Frederik, but that sounds like something that's incomprehensible. So I try to put that into perspective. And the total amount of computing power that we have in the world today is estimated at around 2 exaflops, which is 2 quintillion calculations per second. Now, what that means in human language basically is that all of us need to be doing 250 million calculations every single second. I don't know about your math, but mine's not that good. So in your perspective, Frederik, how does the balance of data volume and all of this computing power really play a pivotal role in further advancing artificial intelligence? And I think definitely, for you in the context of the quality of that data and some of the challenges that that presents. I don't know if you've got any special insights that you want to share with us.
Okay. So if we talk about 2015, maybe return first to that, why was one of the reasons that it failed was lack of computing power for a lot of customers, for starters. Okay, and that all changed with the advent of the cloud and people that are gaining more and more trust in the cloud, where you, of course, get that computing power. Because even these days, you might come across them, people asking, this is great fun. We want a solution, but we want to have it on-prem. And then you have to start explaining to them that that won't work because they don't have sufficient computing power. And of course, if we're talking resources, computing resources on the one hand, you also need the data to train your models. And the more data you have to train your initial model, the higher performing your model will become. But of course, that's the amount of data on the one hand. But on the other hand, you also have the data quality. You want to avoid bias. And the better the quality you have, the more data you have, the higher performing your model will become, which will also make it easier to reuse your model in different contexts. But I mean, in different applications, you could reuse it for more customers because you will need, if you have a high performing model, you will need less computing resources. Meaning, if you have a great model, you could serve several customers with the same model. That's one thing. But on the other hand, also, it will make it easier to transfer that model to different contexts. Let's say you have a great model for processing insurance information. If you have a great model, it may become easier to use that same model in a financial context and to transfer it to that different context with a smaller amount of data that you need to use. So that's all great. So meaning that you need a lot of data and good quality data to train your initial model. But of course, there are some challenges in doing that. And for starters, if you look at the European context, we have GDPR. Lots of data, and most data and lots of businesses contains lots of personal information, which renders the data, yeah, in some cases unusable to train a model. Also, data is often locked in silos. It's hidden away somewhere in an application, on a file system, or wherever. It's unattainable. It can't be reused or repurposed easily. And also, yeah, and that's something that we'll talk later about, is that a lot of companies still surprisingly have a lot of paper that contains a lot of data. And also, and that's something else that we often see, is that the data in a lot of cases simply can't be interpreted or used without the intervention of the line of business application. So all these things, of course, make it harder to have the proper data and the proper amount of data to train a model. So that's that's one of the advantages, of course, for the larger businesses and organizations. They already have plenty of data, and they will have a bigger advantage in this space race as compared to smaller organizations.
Yeah, and I've heard that from many different people. I think it's absolutely true that data is the new gold mine, right? So whoever's going to get there first, or have that competitive advantage in the market today, is going to be a company and organization that has the ability to access their data efficiently. And in previous conversations on the podcast, we've already talked about the quality of that data. That's hyper important. But with you, I actually wanted to touch on a very specific aspect of that. Now, with the rise of deepfakes, voice cloning, data manipulation is really becoming increasingly sophisticated. We're seeing that. I was reading an article lately about fraud detection and how that's even evolving, because AI is now being used to actually commit fraud. And as AI continues to embed itself into our daily lives, the need for trustworthy data seems more urgent than ever, in my opinion. So from your experience and some of the, well, actually significant milestone, congratulations again, by the way, on becoming a qualified trust service provider. How do you perceive that challenge of maintaining data integrity? And just for everybody on the audience, could you also at the same time explain a little bit about exactly what is a qualified trust service provider for preservation and electronic archiving?
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful. So yeah, you mentioned data is the new gold, and maybe you could add reliable and authentic data is the new platinum.
Yep, I agree.
And because, of course, if we're talking data, and that's something that we also do quite often in our daily work, if there's not sufficient data, you simply create synthetic data. And you could consider in some cases, of course, the abuse of deepfakes and others as synthetic data because it looks real. And in some cases, it could even be used to train other models, which actually happens. Okay. And so if you're talking things like deepfakes and frauds, we're no longer talking integrity, we're rather talking authenticity. So authenticity is basically, is this information real? Is this what it appears to be? Is this information what it tells us what it is? So that's authenticity. So, and if we're talking authenticity, and we refer that, or we make the link to a qualified trust service provider. A qualified trust service provider is somebody or a service that has attained the highest level of confidence and trust in delivering a service. And in the context of archiving and preservation of information, that means that information that is delivered by a qualified trust service provider has to be considered as authentic, meaning there's a reversal of the burden of proof and non-repudiation of that information. For us, that's quite important because that's something that we've always been striving to. Yeah, that's the field in which we've always been working. And what is quite important is, of course, that the information that has been archived can be used as evidence in a court of law, and has to be accepted by the juror, for example. Okay. How do we do this? This is using the same type of technologies as with digital signatures. So, with a digital signature, what happens? Mainly, what you do is that you sign a document, and that document has to be accepted as authentic, because you have an idea about the provenance of the data. the authenticity of the data, the integrity for starters. But what we do with our solution is that we do that with any type of information. So it could be video, images, data, whatever. Those same techniques are applied to whatever data. So if somebody archives data with us, he has some level of certainty with regard to the integrity of and authenticity.
Well, it's good to know that these kind of capabilities are becoming more relevant with the market. And I think that's actually also a bit being driven by all of the changes that are happening. And I'm sure because I do remember talking about digital signatures many, many years already ago. And I think it's only now that people are actually starting to do that day in, day out. I remember back in the day when I first bought my first house, I had to sign everything manually. And just last week when I sold
Yeah.
it, I was signing everything digitally, but there's a gap of about 5 or 7 years. So it takes a long time for these things to come into effect. Nonetheless, we already talked about the speed at which the AI technology is evolving. Have you seen any, measures for ensuring data integrity evolve as well to actually be able to cope with this very advanced capabilities that are now coming into everybody's hands? Can you shed some light on the latest advancements or methodologies that have come into place to really safeguard this data that you've talked about to continue to be able to be that trusted provider to mitigate alteration or corruption in this age of AI, basically?
Yeah, strangely enough, it's something that you don't see very often in the field yet. Coming up to this podcast, I also did a quick search on Google, and strangely enough, I couldn't find any data integrity solutions. There's plenty of consultants out there, uh, but no real solutions. So in the beginning of last year, I came up with the concept of what I've called archiving by design. So a bit like security by design or privacy by design, so that you apply a methodology. I've even written a white paper about it with a little help from ChatGPT. But the concept of archiving by design is that you start archiving at the source. So when you create the data, you would immediately archive it to provide guarantees with regard to authenticity and integrity of the data, which is entirely new because these days, normally, archiving is only an afterthought. It's something that you do at the end of the information lifecycle. So once the information has been processed and it has been reworked and whatever, at the end of the day, they are going to archive it. And that's maybe too late because in the context of digital information, that information changes. Its format change, the way information is stored changes. The systems that you even use to store that information change during the lifetime of the data. So that's something that really should come at the beginning of the life cycle. And that's where the concept of archiving by design enters. Surprisingly, after that, I posted that on LinkedIn. I got plenty of reactions on that post. I got contacted by somebody from the European Commission. And apparently, they also have a task force working on the topic of archiving by design. From their perspective, it's of course not immediately linked to data, but it's also something that they are working on. So that's something that you can expect to come in the years to come. Also, another thing that we see with the advancements in the field of AI is that in a lot of organizations don't do their archiving properly. So even if we would have a concept like archiving by design, a lot of companies still wouldn't do it because they don't have the tools to properly classify that information, and in some cases extract the proper metadata from that information. And that's thanks to the rise of AI. It now becomes easier to classify that information in an automated way and to archive that information. So it will also help to make advancements in that field. So AI will actually help to improve data integrity.
Yeah, and I think although that technology in itself, classification, has been around for a very long time, I think that's what we're all seeing in the market today. That the fact that to an extent, AI has kind of become a little bit commoditized. It's something that is easily accessible at this point. People feel much more familiar and know about the technology, so they're also ready to start using it within these processes. It was interesting to hear you say that you got connected with somebody from the European Union Commission about archiving by design. And I'm guessing that with the advent of AI technologies really influencing standards and practices in every single field, I wonder if there's any new challenges or opportunities that have really emerged specifically in that area.
Yeah, of course, if we're talking European Commission or Europe, first thing a lot of people think about is new regulations and laws and things that influence our daily lives. And very often people think about it in the worst possible way. But actually, Europe is very aware about the fact that data is the new gold. And Europe is also aware about the challenges that poses for a lot of companies. As I said, smaller companies have quite a hard time to get their hands on proper data. Europe wants to get rid of that difference between the smaller companies and the big companies, which is a good thing in the end, because you don't want to have big tech governing the world in the end.
So no Black Mirror episodes for reality.
And so that's also what Europe has tried to do with the Data Governance Act, try and level that playing field. So what they've done with the Data Governance Act is that you can have companies that start operating as data intermediaries, where they can sell the data that is owned by one or several companies or by a public sector, so that that data can be reused by other companies. So because that's also something you've been working in the field, Maxime, that's something that you very often see. You might have a bright idea about, we could maybe make a model that does this and this, but very often the hard part is getting the data to do that. And companies are very often reluctant to give that data to other parties. And that's why Europe has launched the Data Governance Act. So to make a framework to make this easier to reuse this data. And so a company can become a data intermediary on the one hand, but there's also even the level of a non-profit organization that could make data available for reuse by others. Those non-profits are called data altruism organizations. So those are really two concepts that Europe wants to launch. So the concept of a data intermediary and a data altruism organization. But unfortunately, I think the Data Governance Act is there since 2022. And there's only one data intermediary company in Europe so far, and no data altruism organization until now. So it's a very nice initiative, but so far there's little interest. That's something that will come over the years, and especially now with the rise of AI. The interest will be sparked there because people will start seeing business models around that. That's one thing. We have the Data Governance Act. And next to that, we also have the revision of ADAS. And ADAS, in the new version, the main thing, of course, is the mobile wallets. But of course, if you want to exchange information via mobile wallets, you don't need the documents itself. You need the data, which is enclosed in the wallets. That's one thing. And also what's also going to be a part of the revision of ADAS, apart from qualified electronic archiving, which is of course part of the revision of ADAS, because if you're going to share documents or data, you also need to get guarantees with regard to the authenticity of those documents and data. And one additional service that is going to be added there is qualified electronic attribute attestation. And that's more or less a service that allows you to check the authenticity of information. So to check the provenance and the authenticity and so that's coming with the revision of ADAS. And next to that, there's some other initiatives as well, European data spaces, where Europe wants to normalize the data across verticals. So in different verticals, they want to have normalized data to enable interoperability, of course, and to make it easier to interpret data from your colleagues in the market. And also another one is the single digital gateway, which will make public sector data available. So plenty of things coming there. If we're talking data, lots of initiatives.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot of new things today. I had no idea that Europe was already that far along in trying to put in place the right pathways, the right controls to ensure that there's an openness of data, but at the same time that we also can guarantee that authenticity and the trustworthiness, which I think is absolutely important. But one thing's interesting. So in the previous episode of this podcast series, I talked a lot with Andrew Perry about the European AI Act and also the US version of that. You didn't mention that one, but although it does seem to influence a lot of different things, a lot of different companies and what they're doing. Is there any reason why you didn't mention that one specifically?
Yeah, because the AI Act doesn't make a reference specifically to the data. The other ones relate more to the data. And as you said, indeed, very often people think that Europe is interfering with our day-to-day lives and tries to overregulate things. But in some cases, it's simply to create a framework to enable collaboration, to enable interoperability, and to make it easier for companies to make advancements in certain fields. If we're talking the AI Act, that's maybe the one that comes maybe a little bit too early because we're seeing so much advancements and so rapidly in the field of AI currently. But what's interesting with the AI Act that they've created different levels of, what would I say, uh, levels of risk with regard to AI models. So where you have the non-permissible models, the ones that could intervene or make your daily life impossible, to put it like that. So solutions like, for example, the social scoring. The other ones that interfere with a person's life, to put it like that. So that might have a severe impact on your daily life, which are the high-risk models, the ones for credit scoring, medical treatments. So those will always have to have human oversight, which is a good thing in the end. But of course, some of the criticism there are, for example, with credit scoring, that's already managed by the financial sector. So there were already uh, rules rules of play in place for those things.
Yeah, when I saw the different levels of risk, I found it quite interesting that a lot of things that already exist today suddenly fell into a category that was actually quite high up, even
Yeah.
though probably without, again, people really knowing that there was already some form of machine learning AI involved in that process. So it's interesting how that is evolving. So one other thing I wanted to pick your brain on, I mean, archiving, you said it yourself, is very adjacent to things like classification. It's all about ingress of information, and that also includes documents.
Yep.
And you even said we're doing intelligent document processing back in the day, and that that's still a key part of what you do. So the IDP market has undergone, with the emergence of generative AI technologies, kind of a really big, I would not say disruption. I would actually say revolution, in the sense that it's rekindled both awareness, in my opinion, and also the necessity for that technology. But what's your take on the past year, 2 years, and how that's changed for the market specifically? And where do you think it's heading next?
Yeah. So indeed, as you said, for us, the two have always been quite linked. So because if you process incoming information, in the end, it needs to be properly archived because normally you're not supposed to change that information because it's something that you received from a third party. Indeed, Maxime, as you said, the two, so intelligent document processing and digital archiving, have always been linked because if you receive some information, normally, let's say from an inbound process, it's communication that you receive from a third party. So you're not supposed to change that or to alter that. So you need to properly archive that. But what we've seen in the market of IDP, because first of all, one of the impacts was a bit of a standstill. And at the beginning of 2023, we saw a bit of a standstill, and that's simply because people were waiting. They were eager to learn what was going to happen to that market with the advent of generative AI and the LLMs. And that's one thing. But for starters, what we still see is that there's a bit of a misunderstanding of the value add of the IDP solutions. People think, okay, now we have generative AI, ChatGPT, and indeed, if you do the test, it's great at extracting data, but the value add of an IDP solution is more than that. It's also applying your business rules. It's automating processes in the backends, and also the variety of integrations with different types of solutions. So they that you can use, for example, for data enrichment, for normalization of your data, and so on and so on. Because if it's purely data extraction, that's not a solution. Like,
It's quite hard to build a house with just a hammer, right? So, and that's how I kind of compare companies. Like you said, it's amazing the things that generative AI can do, and it's really revolutionizing a lot of different things. But it is a singular technology, and if you want to solve a real world problem, you're going to need more than one tool to actually go make that work. So, yeah, I would
yeah,
definitely agree
yeah,
with that.
yeah. Yeah, and also what we still see quite often, even this week, is a misunderstanding of the real capabilities of generative AI. That's also true in part by posts you see, for example, on LinkedIn, where I saw a post like ChatGPT can read my doctor's recipe and I can't even read it, but go ahead and try it. It doesn't work. What happens is that you get requests from customers. Oh, we've seen that ChatGPT can also read handwritten text and process it completely. Yeah, but that's not the case. So you have that kind of fake news again, thanks to AI. But on the other hand, what we see, of course, in the field of IDP is that there's a big opportunity for IDP also thanks to the LLMs, because of course you can improve your IDP solution using generative AI. So if you can integrate it properly, you can improve your solution on the one hand. And also what we also see is that a lot of requests that we've seen recently is, for example, in the field of anonymization, because of course people still have lots of information which is in documents, which might be on paper or digital. So, but of course, those documents need to be anonymized first to be able to use them to train your model. And that's something that we've also seen quite often.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said, right? Because it made me think of an article that I actually also just read this week in Forbes that said 90% of generative AI pilots actually never go into production. And one of the main reasons that was called out is, like you said, some fake news in there, LinkedIn articles shouting about certain capabilities that the technology might have that are simply not a reality. And one of the main reasons that Forbes called out was the business or the IT people or whoever was working with that technology was applying it to the wrong business case. It was not actually fulfilling that business need. And there were other solutions, existing solutions, already things that they had in house that were far better at solving that particular problem. For me, it's been really interesting to see, I think for a lot of us out there that have been in this market for a bit of time, kind of saw this whole evolution, but in fast forward, right? So start of 2023, everybody was really excited. It's going to do everything. And by the end of 2023, everybody was starting to realize, oh, so that's what it really does. So yeah, it's been quite fun to watch. It's been quite fun to watch. So Frederick, we delved into some really complex and quite theoretical aspects sometimes about artificial intelligence, data integrity, which for me actually was really enlightening. But I guess for a lot of our listeners that might have been a little bit far from home. Is there any kind of use case, customer story, or memorable customer success that you want to share with us that would make it a bit more applicable to everybody and to understand, okay, all these things that these guys have talked about today, how does that really have an impact either on a business or even me personally as a customer of that business?
Yeah. So without entering into too much detail, but if we're talking, of course, data and data integrity in the combination with let's say, for example, an IDP solution. So people that start investing in those two or in the combination of those two will see new markets opening up, because on the one hand, the field of IDP as it is being used these days, so mainly to process incoming information, that is very likely going to change in years to come. But if you combine that with proper data integrity solutions, your business might change and shift over years to come. You might become, for example, a data intermediary, and that might make things interesting. So there's one of our customers for which we have been working, let's say, in the field of data collection in the past few years, and that was the main source of business, was collecting data, and based on that, creates decisions or yeah. I need to find a way to say this diplomatically without giving too much away. So, but based on that data, for their customers, they took specific decisions. So they help their customers based on that data collection. But of course, what are they going to do in the future possibly is to become a data intermediary instead. Make it easier for other verticals to reuse that data for other types of businesses. And that's going to allow them to expand their markets. But of course, if they want to do that, they need to give guarantees to others as well with regard to data integrity and data authenticity.
That's interesting. So basically, they were because of the technologies that exist, they were able to collect the right data, help their customers create, or actually not create, but make the right decisions based on that. And now with this evolution that we're seeing into, well, like you said, actually found that quite interesting. Data is the new gold, and trustworthy data, accurate data is going to be the new platinum. They have created for themselves yet another opportunity to expand into that market. Yeah, that makes it
Yeah.
really applicable.
Yeah, and there's also another evolution in there because currently their service is limited to one country. And with all the new European regulations, they can expand their business to the entire European continent
See?
or to the entire European Union. Course,
That's what I like about what
far.
you explained about how Europe is approaching this, because it is really opening up those pathways, which I think is really great.
Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you for all of these insights. I think that I learned a lot, and it's really interesting to see yet another facet of this entire revolution, this paradigm shift that's happening around us. And we'll be continuing to explore all of the diverse and fascinating landscape around technology and artificial intelligence. But I'd like you to ask you to contribute to our next conversation that I'll be having with somebody within this field. So I wanted to see if you could ask a very thought provoking question for our next guest that you might have an interest in that would pique the audience curiosity. What would you like to ask our following guest that's going to appear on the podcast?
Yeah, okay. So back in the days when we started working in the field of AI and machine learning, we always thought that the first things or the first types of jobs that were going to be replaced were the ones with the traditional decision processes. So, like for example, in legal proceedings, insurance processes, financial processes, and even medical processes. So everything where most of the decisions are based on statistics or on historical data. So the early applications of machine learning were in fact what we called multilinear regression. So trying to find the algorithm in an automated way, to put it like that. But what we've seen now over the last year is that, in fact, those are not the jobs that are going to be disrupted the most in the short term. It's rather the creative jobs. So, like writing, copywriting, designers, but also software engineers, which is surprising because software engineering was one of the domains that everybody thought that's a safe choice for the future. That's because we always thought it's a creative job because a good software engineer is a creative person. He can solve a solution, or he can create a cool solution based on a problem, and has to come up with a software solution. But what we see now is that that is one of the first domains that is going to be disrupted. So, how do you see the impact on that sector and on the economy, to put it like that?
That's a very good question. I look forward to asking that one to somebody really soon, because I want to get an answer to that. Frederik, this was great. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast. It was great having you on. I hope you had a good time as well. And
Thanks for the
hopefully we'll have you on for another episode in the future. Thanks again.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Maxime, and see you soon. Bye.